I started walking the campground circuit because I didn't have anywhere else to go. That's the truth of it. No dramatic reason. No adventure calling. Just a 32-year-old woman with a dead-end lease about to expire. No references that would survive a phone call. And a suspension from my last job that turned permanent when the restaurant closed 3 weeks into it. The collapse wasn't sudden where I lived. It was incremental. First, the highway construction project stopped. Then the chain stores started closing. Then the grocery store cut its hours. Then the gas station on Route 9 shut down. Then the police department consolidated with the next county over and response times went from 20 minutes to 2 hours. Then the school district merged. Then the hospital downgraded to an urgent care clinic. Then the urgent care clinic closed. By the time I packed my car, the town had maybe 60 people left who weren't over 70. Everyone else had moved to where jobs still existed, if they had the savings to do it. I didn't. I'd read somewhere that the National Park Service was still maintaining some of the campgrounds even though visitor numbers had dropped. They were keeping them open as a kind of placeholder, a federal presence in areas that were otherwise being abandoned. The infrastructure was still there. Running water sometimes, bathrooms, fire pits, cleared sites. I thought maybe I could move between them, stay a few days at each one. It was April, so the weather was warming up. I had a tent, a sleeping bag, a camp stove, and about $400. I figured I could stretch that for a month if I was careful, and maybe by then I'd have figured out what came next. The first campground I stopped at was Pine Ridge, about 90 miles from where I'd been living. It was a small site, maybe 20 campsites arranged in a rough loop around a gravel access road. There was a central bathroom building, a hand pump well, and a wooden fee station near the entrance. The place was completely empty. I pulled in around 3 in the afternoon. The gate was open. The fee station had a stack of envelopes and a drop box, but no attendant. There was a paper notice taped to the front that said the campground was open for primitive camping. Fees were $5 per night, payment on the honor system. I paid for 2 nights and picked a site near the back of the loop, away from the road. The picnic table was weathered but stable. The fire pit had old ashes in it. The site marker was a wooden post with the number 14 carved into it. I set up my tent and sat at the picnic table and ate a cold can of beans. The forest around me was quiet. I could hear birds, wind in the trees, nothing else. No traffic sounds, no voices, no other campers. It felt fine. Lonely, but fine. I spent the evening reading a book I'd brought, and when it got dark I went into the tent and fell asleep listening to the wind. The next day I stayed at the site, conserving gas. I walked the campground loop in the morning. All the other sites were empty. The bathroom building was functional but basic. 2 toilets, 2 sinks, cold water only. It smelled like mildew and old concrete, but it was clean enough. There was a bulletin board near the fee station with a map of the area and some informational notices. Most of them were years old, curling at the edges, but there was one newer printout, maybe a few months old, pinned to the center. It was titled, Visitor Guidelines for Low-Maintenance Campgrounds. I read it while I stood there. The list was straightforward. 1. All campers must register at the fee station upon arrival. Use the provided envelopes. Include name, vehicle information, and intended length of stay. 2. Campfires are permitted in designated fire rings only. Fires must be fully extinguished before leaving the site or going to sleep. 3. Do not approach or attempt to communicate with individuals camping at sites marked with red tags. These sites are reserved for extended stay administrative use. 4. If you observe a campsite that appears occupied but has no vehicle present, do not enter the site. Report the site number to the ranger station if contact is available. 5. The campground loop road is one way. Do not drive against the indicated direction. 6. Do not remove or alter site markers, fee station materials, or informational postings. 7. If you hear movement or voices near your site after dark, remain inside your tent or vehicle. Do not investigate. 8. Quiet hours are from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. During quiet hours, minimize noise and avoid walking the campground loop. I read it twice. Most of it was standard. The part about red tag sites seemed a little odd, but I figured it was some kind of bureaucratic thing. Maybe they were keeping certain sites reserved for maintenance staff or researchers. The part about not investigating voices after dark felt strange, but I chalked it up to wildlife warnings. Bears, maybe. Or people being cautious about other campers. I took a picture of the notice with my phone just to have it, and then I walked back to my site. That night I heard something. It was around 11. I was lying in my tent halfway asleep. when I heard footsteps on gravel. They were slow and uneven, like someone walking carefully in the dark. They came from the direction of the loop road, passed near my site, and then faded into the woods. I stayed still and listened. No voices, no flashlight, just the footsteps and then nothing. I thought about the guideline. Do not investigate. I stayed in my tent. The footsteps didn't come back. In the morning, I checked the area around my site. There were no fresh tracks in the dirt. No signs anyone had been there. I left Pine Ridge that afternoon and drove to the next campground on my list. It was called Crescent Lake, about 50 miles west. It was larger than Pine Ridge, maybe 40 sites, arranged along the shore of a small reservoir. The lake itself was low, the waterline 20 feet back from where it used to be, leaving a wide strip of dried mud and scattered driftwood. The campground was empty, just like Pine Ridge. I registered at the fee station, paid for 2 nights, and picked a site near the water, Site 22. The bulletin board here had the same visitor guidelines printout, same list, same wording. I read it again, paying closer attention this time. The part about red tagged sites stood out. I hadn't seen any red tags at Pine Ridge, but I hadn't been looking for them either. I walked the loop road at Crescent Lake, checking the site markers. Most of them were plain wood, just a number carved or burned into the surface. But Site 8 had a small red plastic tag zip tied to the post. The site looked unoccupied. No tent, no vehicle, no gear. But the picnic table had been recently used. There were marks in the dirt around the fire pit, like someone had been sitting there. I didn't go closer. I walked back to my site and spent the rest of the afternoon by the lake, skipping stones across the low water. That night, I heard the footsteps again. This time they were closer. They came from the direction of the loop road, passed within maybe 10 feet of my tent, and then stopped. I held my breath and listened. Silence. Then the footsteps started again, moving away, back toward the road. I stayed in the tent until morning. When I checked the area around my site, I found a single boot print in the dirt near the edge of the clearing. It was large, maybe a men's size 11 or 12. The tread was worn smooth, almost flat. There were no other prints, just the one. I packed up and left that morning. I started keeping a notebook after that. I wrote down the name of each campground, the dates I stayed, anything unusual I noticed. The pattern became clear after the 4th campground. Every site had the same visitor guidelines printout. Every site had at least one red-tagged campsite. Every site was completely empty except for me. And every night, I heard footsteps. They never came into my tent. They never spoke. They just walked past, somewhere between 10 p.m. and midnight, and then they were gone. I started wondering if I was hearing the same person at every campground, or different people. I started wondering if they were real. At the 5th campground, a place called Meadow Run, I decided to stay awake and watch. I set up my tent as usual, but I didn't get inside it. I sat at the picnic table with a flashlight and waited. The footsteps came at 10:47 p.m. I heard them approaching on the loop road, slow and deliberate. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. Nothing. The footsteps kept coming. I could hear gravel crunching, but I couldn't see anyone. I stood up and swept the flashlight across the road, the trees, the neighboring campsites. Empty. The footsteps passed my site, maybe 15 feet away, and continued down the road. I followed the sound with the flashlight, but there was nothing there. Just the sound of boots on gravel, moving steadily away. I sat back down and turned off the flashlight. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I walked the campground loop and checked every site. Site 5 had a red tag. I stopped at the edge of the site and looked. There was a tent set up. A small dome tent, dark green, with the rainfly pulled tight. There was no vehicle, no cooler, no camp chairs, no gear outside the tent. I stepped closer. The tent was zipped shut. I couldn't see inside. I stood there for a long time, trying to decide if I should call out, knock on a tent pole, check if someone needed help. Then I remembered the guideline. Do not approach or attempt to communicate with individuals camping at sites marked with red tags. I backed away and returned to my site. I left Meadow Run an hour later. I stopped at a library in a small town about 30 miles away. It was one of the few buildings still open. The librarian was an older woman who looked surprised to see anyone. I asked if I could use a computer. She nodded and pointed me to a desk near the back. I searched for information about the campgrounds I'd been staying at. Most of the results were old from before the collapse. Visitor reviews, hiking blogs, outdated park service pages. But I found one forum post from 8 months ago, written by someone who'd been traveling through the same region. The post was titled, "Has anyone else noticed this?" The user described staying at several campgrounds in the area and encountering the same strange guidelines. They mentioned the red-tagged sites, the footsteps at night, the complete absence of other campers. They said they'd tried to talk to a ranger about it, but the ranger station had been closed. They said they'd reported it to the park service online, but never received a response. The post ended with the question, "Is anyone still maintaining these places, or is this something else?" There were no replies. I copied the username and searched for other posts by the same person. Nothing. I closed the browser and left the library. That night, I stayed at a campground called Blackwater Hollow. It was the most remote site I'd visited so far, 15 miles down a dirt road that hadn't been graded in years. The campground was smaller than the others. 10 sites arranged in a tight cluster near a creek that had dried up to a trickle. The fee station was there, the same honor system set up. The bulletin board had the same guidelines. I registered, paid, and picked Site 3. There were 2 red tag sites here, Sites 7 and 9. Both of them had tents set up. I walked past them slowly, looking without getting too close. The tent at Site 7 was identical to the one I'd seen at Meadow Run. Dark green dome tent, rainfly tight, no gear outside. The tent at Site 9 was different. It was larger, an old canvas wall tent with a peaked roof and a stovepipe sticking out the top. The door flap was tied shut. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anyone. I went back to my site and made dinner on my camp stove. As the sun set, I started to feel watched. It wasn't a sound or a movement. It was just a feeling, low and constant, like someone standing just outside my line of sight. I turned around several times, scanning the trees, the other campsites, the road. Nothing. The feeling didn't go away. At 10:30 p.m., I got into my tent and zipped it shut. The footsteps came at 10:52. This time, they stopped right outside my tent. I froze. I could hear breathing. Low and steady, just on the other side of the nylon wall. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. The breathing continued for maybe 30 seconds. Then the footsteps started again, moving away. I stayed awake until dawn. When I finally left the tent, I found another boot print in the dirt. Same tread, same size. This one was less than 3 feet from my tent door. I packed up immediately and left. I drove for 2 hours before I stopped. I pulled into a rest area on the highway, parked in the corner of the lot, and tried to think. I could keep moving to different campgrounds, but the pattern was going to continue. The footsteps, the red tag sites, the feeling of being followed. Or I could stop. Find a town with a motel, spend the money I had left, and figure out something else. But I didn't have enough money for that. A motel would burn through my funds in less than a week, and then I'd be worse off than I was now. I pulled out my notebook and flipped through the entries. 6 campgrounds, 6 sets of footsteps, 4 red-tagged sites that I'd seen, all of them with tents, none of them with people I could actually see. I started to notice something I hadn't paid attention to before. The guideline about one-way loop roads. At every campground, the loop road ran clockwise. The fee station was always at the entrance, and the road curved around the campsites in the same direction. I'd been following that direction without thinking about it. But what if I didn't? I sat there for a while, turning the idea over. Then I got back on the road and drove to the next campground. It was called Laurel Point. 23 sites, arranged around a loop road that curved through dense forest. I registered at the fee station, paid for one night, and drove onto the loop. Then I stopped. I put the car in reverse and backed up to the entrance. I turned around and drove the loop in the wrong direction. The road curved the same way, but everything felt different. The trees seemed closer. The light seemed dimmer. The air smelled like old leaves and standing water. I passed Site 12, empty. Site 11, empty. Site 11, empty. Site 10. Red tagged, 10 set up, same dark green dome tent. I kept driving. At Site 6, I saw something I hadn't seen before. There was someone standing near the picnic table. I slowed down. The figure was motionless, facing away from the road. It was wearing a dark jacket and jeans. No backpack, no gear. I stopped the car and rolled down the window. "Hey," I called. "You okay?" The figure didn't move. I waited. Still nothing. I put the car in park and opened the door. The moment I stepped out, the figure turned around. It didn't have a face. Not a blurred face, not a shadowed face. Just smooth skin where the features should have been. I got back in the car, slammed the door, and reversed hard. The figure didn't follow. It just stood there facing me until I backed around the curve and it disappeared from view. I turned the car around, drove the loop in the correct direction, and parked at Site 18. I didn't leave the car. I sat there with the doors locked, the engine running, trying to process what I'd just seen. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But I'd seen it. I'd called out to it. It had turned around. I looked at the guideline printout I'd photographed on my phone. The campground loop road is one way. Do not drive against the indicated direction. I put my phone down and stared at the trees. The footsteps came at 11:04 p.m. I heard them pass the car, slow and steady, heading toward the back of the campground. I didn't look. I kept my eyes on the steering wheel and waited for the sound to fade. When it was quiet again, I started the car and left. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station just outside the park boundary. It was closed, but the lot was lit, and that felt safer than the woods. I slept in the car with the doors locked. The next morning, I decided to try something different. I drove back to Pine Ridge, the first campground I'd stayed at. I wanted to see if the red tag sites had changed, if there were more of them now, if anything was different. The campground looked the same, the fee station, the bulletin board, the loop road. I didn't register this time. I just drove slowly through the loop, checking the site markers. Site 14, where I camped before, was empty. Site 9 had a red tag now. It hadn't before. The tent set up there was mine. Same color, same shape, same stuff, sack tied to the rainfly. I stopped the car and stared. I was in the car. My tent was in the back seat. I could see it. But there it was, set up at Site 9, exactly the way I'd set it up at other campgrounds. I got out of the car and walked toward the site. The closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The air was too still. The light was too flat. I stopped at the edge of the site. The tent was zipped shut. I couldn't see inside. I reached for the zipper pull. My hand stopped. I don't know why. It just stopped, like I'd hit an invisible wall. I tried again. Same thing. I stepped back. The tent didn't move. There was no wind, no sound from inside. I walked back to the car, got in, and drove away. I didn't go to another campground after that. I drove to a town about 60 miles away and parked behind a closed diner. I spent 3 days there, sleeping in the car, eating canned food, trying to figure out what to do next. On the 4th day, I ran out of gas money. I had 2 choices. I could stay in the car and wait for something to happen, or I could go back to the campgrounds. The campgrounds were free. I could stretch my remaining supplies if I stayed at them. I could keep moving, keep trying to figure out what was happening. I drove back. This time I went to a campground I hadn't visited before. It was called Thornhill, a mid-sized site with 30 campsites arranged in 2 loops. I registered at the fee station and picked Site 24 near the back of the second loop. I set up my tent, made dinner, and sat at the picnic table as the sun went down. The footsteps came at 10:38 p.m. They passed my site, just like always. But this time, they stopped. I heard them stop on the road, maybe 20 feet away. I didn't move. Then I heard a voice. It was low, flat, and emotionless. "You've been moving." I didn't answer. "You've been to 7 campgrounds now. You've registered at each one. You paid your fees. You followed the guidelines." I stayed silent. "Except once. You drove the wrong way. You saw something you weren't supposed to see." I gripped the edge of the picnic table. The voice continued. "You're gonna keep moving. That's what people like you do. You don't have anywhere else to go." I finally spoke. "Who are you?" Silence. Then the footsteps started again, moving away. I sat there until the sound faded completely. In the morning, I walked the campground loop. Site 11 had a red tag now. The tent set up there was mine again. I checked the back seat of my car. My tent was still there. I stood at the edge of Site 11 and looked at the duplicate tent. It was identical. Same wear on the seams, same dirt on the floor corners, same way I always staked the guy lanes. I reached for the zipper again. This time my hand went through. I unzipped the tent and looked inside. It was empty. No sleeping bag, no gear, no sign anyone had been there. But the inside of the tent smelled like me, like my soap, my clothes, my sweat. I zipped it back up and walked away. I started keeping a list of the red tagged sites. Every campground I visited, I wrote down which sites had tags, what kind of tents were set up, and whether I recognized them. After 2 more weeks, the pattern was undeniable. The red tagged sites were filling in behind me. Every campground I left, a new red tagged site appeared, and the tents at those sites were mine. Not similar, not copied, mine. I was leaving pieces of myself at every stop. I tried to test it. At a campground called Fern Hollow, I packed up my tent in the morning and checked the loop before I left. No red tags. I drove halfway to the next campground, then turned around and came back. Site 7 had a red tag now. The tent there was mine. I checked the back seat. My tent was still there. I drove to Site 7 and looked at the duplicate. It was set up exactly the way I'd had it that morning. Same orientation, same stakes, same rainfly tension. I unzipped it and looked inside. My sleeping bag was there. My backpack, my camp stove. I checked the car. All my gear was still there. I reached into the duplicate tent and picked up the sleeping bag. It felt real. It smelled real. The tag on the stuffed sack had the same frayed corner. I dropped it and backed away. I left Fern Hollow and didn't go back. I started avoiding the red tag sites completely. I stopped walking the loops. I stopped investigating. But the footsteps kept coming, and the voice came back. It happened at a campground called Stone Creek. I was sitting in my tent after dark, writing in my notebook, when I heard the footsteps stop outside. Then the voice, "You're still here." I didn't answer. "You've been to 14 campgrounds now. 14 sites with your tent. 14 places you stayed." I put down the notebook. "Why are you following me?" The voice didn't answer the question. "You registered at every site. You paid your fees, you followed the guidelines, you're doing everything correctly. Then what do you want?" Silence. "Then you already know." The footsteps started again and faded into the distance. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I checked the campground loop. Every site had a red tag. Every site had my tent. 30 identical tents, all set up the same way, all empty. I got in my car and drove to the next campground. The same thing happened. Every site, red tagged, my tent. I tried a campground I'd already visited, Pine Ridge, same thing. Every site had a red tag now. Every site had my tent. I drove to Crescent Lake, same. Meadow Run, same. I was filling the campgrounds behind me. Not just one site. All of them. I pulled over on the side of the road and tried to think. I'd been moving for 6 weeks. I stayed at 18 different campgrounds. I'd registered everyone, paid my fees, followed the guidelines. And now every site I'd been to was marked. Every site had a copy of my tent, my gear, my presence. I looked at the guidelines on my phone. All campers must register at the fee station upon arrival. Use the provided envelopes. Include name, vehicle information, and intended length of stay. I'd done that. Every time. I opened the photos on my phone and found the picture I'd taken of my first registration envelope at Pine Ridge. I'd written my name, my car's make and model, my license plate, and 2 nights for the length of stay. I zoomed in on the envelope. At the bottom, in small print, there was a line I hadn't noticed before. By registering, you acknowledge your consent to site assignment and agree to remain available for administrative contact. I read it again. Site assignment. I thought about the red tags, the duplicate tents, the voice. I wasn't staying at the campgrounds, I was being assigned to them. I started the car and drove to the nearest town with cell service. I searched for the Park Service contact information and found a regional office number. I called. The phone rang 6 times, then went to voicemail. The message was automated. You have reached the Northeast Regional Office of the National Park Service. Our office is currently operating on a reduced schedule. If you are reporting an emergency, please contact local authorities. For all other inquiries, please leave a message. I left a message. I said I was staying at campgrounds in the area and I needed to speak to someone about the visitor guidelines and the red-tagged sites. I didn't expect a call back. But 2 days later, my phone rang. The number was unlisted. I answered. A woman's voice. Calm, professional. "This is Administrator Kellen with the Park Service. I'm returning your call regarding the campground guidelines." "Yes," I said. "I've been staying at several campgrounds in the region, and I've noticed some unusual things. The red tag sites, the footsteps at night, you've been following the guidelines." "Yes, and you registered at each site?" "Yes." "Then you're in compliance. There's no issue. There are duplicate tents. My tent. At every site I've stayed at. And there's someone. That's part of the administrative process. You agreed to site assignment when you registered. I stopped. What does that mean? It means you're fulfilling the terms of your stay. The campgrounds require a minimum presence to remain operational. You're providing that presence. I didn't agree to that. You registered. You paid your fees. You acknowledged the terms. I didn't read any terms. They were printed on the envelope. I thought about the small print at the bottom. By registering, you acknowledge your consent to site assignment. I didn't understand what that meant, I said. That's not relevant. You agreed. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What happens if I stop registering? A pause. That would be non-compliance. We don't recommend non-compliance. We don't recommend non-compliance. What does that mean? It means the campgrounds need to maintain a presence. If you stop providing that presence voluntarily, other measures will be taken. What measures? The line went quiet for a moment. Then you've been assigned to 18 sites so far. That's a significant commitment. We appreciate your participation. I'm not participating. I'm just trying to survive. And the campgrounds are allowing you to do that. Shelter, water, safety. You're receiving those benefits in exchange for your presence. I didn't ask for this. You registered. I hung up. I sat in the car for a long time trying to process what I'd just heard. The campgrounds weren't just places. They were something else. Some kind of system. And I'd agreed to be part of it without knowing. I thought about the guideline. Do not approach or attempt to communicate with individuals camping at sites marked with red tags. I'd assumed the red tags were for other people. Administrators, researchers, long-term campers. But they weren't. They were for me. Every site I registered at, every fee I paid, every night I stayed. I was creating a red-tagged site. A place where my presence was recorded, assigned, locked in. And the tents I kept seeing weren't copies. They were me. Pieces of me. Places I'd been. Moments I'd agreed to without understanding. I checked my remaining cash. $38. I could try to leave the area entirely. Drive out of the park region. Find a different state. Start over. But I didn't have the gas money to get that far. And even if I did, I didn't have a place to go. I'd left my old town because there was nothing there. I'd come to the campgrounds because they were free. And now I was stuck. I drove back to the campgrounds. I didn't have a choice. I stopped at a place called Redstone Point. I'd been there once before, 3 weeks ago. The loop road was full of red-tagged sites now. My tent at every single one. I registered at the fee station anyway. I wrote my name, my car, my plate, and one night. I dropped the envelope in the box and drove to the only site without a red tag, Site 16. I set up my tent and made dinner. As the sun set, I sat at the picnic table and waited. The footsteps came at 10:41 p.m. They stopped outside my site. The voice spoke. You came back. I didn't have anywhere else to go. That's correct. I looked toward the road, but I couldn't see anyone. What happens now? I asked. You continue, you register, you move between sites, you maintain the presence. For how long? Until the assignment is complete. When is that? Silence. Then, when there are no more sites? I thought about the hundreds of campsites across the region, dozens of campgrounds, all of them empty, all of them waiting. I can't do that, I said. You already are. The footsteps started again, moving away. I sat there until morning. When I checked the loop, Site 16 had a red tag now. My tent was set up there, exactly where I'd had it. I checked the back seat of my car. My tent was still there. I packed up and drove to the next campground. I've been moving ever since. I register at every site. I pay my fees. I follow the guidelines. And every site I leave gets a red tag. I've stopped counting how many there are now. I stopped trying to leave. The footsteps come every night. The voice speaks sometimes, but not always. I don't know what happens when I run out of campgrounds. I don't know if I'll ever run out. But I keep moving, because the alternative is staying in one place, at one site. And I don't think I'm ready for that yet. I don't think I'll ever be ready. But the campgrounds are patient, and they're waiting.